Agrees with me? Harlan, you. Here's part of our Skype conversation.
I do think, though, that even if you had every one of your policy wet dreams come true, the bulk of body-worn video footage would be to prosecute civilians.
I mean, that's probably still true.
Now, that doesn't negate Yu's points about the need for good policy to level the playing field. Even if I disagree with him, he holds important and well-articulated viewpoints. To give his argument the weight it deserves, I'll point to the release by police departments of videos that make their officers look good. I understand the motivation. Police chiefs are sick of their cops being falsely accused. Here's a great example.
Stop resisting!
Help! They're attacking me!
Stop resisting!
Don't let me go!
The girl in this video was behaving like a spoiled little debutante and ended up arrested after kicking the world's most patient cop. Then she complained on Facebook that the police treated her badly, so the chief released the video. But if the chief can release that video, what's the precedent for him releasing other videos? Why won't other agencies release video that doesn't show the cops acting so well? My main point is that there are many, 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 many more videos in which civilians act badly and cops behave well. But society cares more about the incidents in which cops behave badly than it does about when civilians behave badly. With 18,000 different policies about when video gets released, calling for better and more consistent policy is understandable. Intense public scrutiny of law enforcement always comes in cycles. In the 1990s, there were 3 important changes introduced to policing based on these cycles. All of them were new technologies billed as the solution to a different problem. 2 were based on use of force, pepper spray and taser, which together would end the excessive use of force problem. The third, dash cams. Starting in the early 1990s, dash cams, video cameras mounted in the windows of police cars, were seen as the solution to several pressing issues. The first was DWI arrests. The cop would describe a drunken bum of a driver slobbering and falling, and in court there sat the defendant dressed like a banker and sober as a judge. In part 2, we met Professor Seth Stoughton.
I'm a law professor at the University of South Carolina School of Law, where I specialize in the regulation of policing.
Here he is talking about the first wave of dash cams in America.
Mothers Against Drunk Driving started to provide a bunch of grants for agencies to get these dash cameras because they were supposed to be the solution to drunk driving acquittals.
MAD hoped that video would solve this problem.
Mama just killed a man.
I can tell you from experience, you get somebody this obviously totzed on a dash video a lot less often than you'd hoped. So dashcam videos helped, especially when the driver is stinking drunk, but they didn't solve the problem of DUI acquittals.
In the mid-90s, the DEA got into the business of funding dash cameras, providing a bunch of grants because of the issue of consent.
Consent was an issue because cops on the highway were pulling in guys with 5, 10, 20 pounds of dope, and after a while, the judges stopped believing that somebody hauling that much dope would consent to a search. The judges were wrong. You wouldn't believe the stupid crap dope runners will do, and yes, I've had people consent to searches of their car while they were carrying dope. Still,
public enemy number 1 in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
After 46 years of the war on drugs, my friends who specialize in interdiction have it happen to them every day. This is my friend Ben Singleton, a detective in a city about halfway between Dallas and Fort Worth. He spent years of nights looking for and finding drugs in cars. Here's a story about one of those.
That's great. Would you mind if I searched your car? Would you give me consent? And he said, well, I don't have any drugs. I just told you, and I don't have anything to hide. And I said, oh, that's great. So will you give me consent to search your car? And he said, yes, sir. And as he stepped out of the car, he said, my drugs are in my backpack. I have speed in that backpack. And I said, how much do you have? And he said, a lot. So I pulled the backpack out. It was one of the biggest seizures I've ever made. Multiple pounds of methamphetamine in a backpack. If he would have said no, I never would have found it. He would have been on his way and delivered his drugs to wherever he was taking them.
In the police academy, I watched video after video of this guy named Fletcher who would sit on the highway for 2 or 3 hours watching cars go by and then be like, that one. He'd pull the car over. He had this whole Columbo thing going. He'd be like charming and bumbling and pleasant and polite. And at one point, he'd ask for permission to search. He always found the dope. And in all these cases, his, mine, Ben's, all of them, they always look shocked when we find the dope.
And they were supposed to be the solution to the consent problem.
Dash cams were not the solution to the consent problem.
And then came 1999-2000, where we had high-profile incidents of racial profiling.
And studies that showed pretty heinous racial profiling by police on traffic stops in places like New Jersey, South Carolina, the Florida Keys.
And that's when the Department of Justice started to provide some fairly significant grants because dash cameras were supposed to be the solution to the problem of racial profiling.
If you're starting to see a pattern here, it's because there is one. Last time I checked, people still believe that there is racial profiling in America, even though 70% of the police cars in the country have dash cams. Don't get me wrong. Dash cams are great technology, and I think we need them. But they follow the pattern. Every few years, a big problem comes along, and it garners all the attention, all the breathless media coverage. Politicians wring their hands and look concerned. There are calls to do something, and the something is often technology. Like backscatter machines in airports. You remember them, right? How they were going to solve the problem of people bringing weapons onto airplanes?
An undercover operation revealed TSA screening at airports fails most of the time. Investigators found that screeners mistest weapons and bombs at baggage checkpoints more often than not.
In October of this year, the biggest ever randomized study of body cameras showed no measurable reduction in complaints or use of force by officers in Washington, D.C. Does that mean cameras are bad? I bought my first body cam in 2010 with $700 of my own money. I bought it so that I would have evidence in case anybody ever said I did something wrong. It succeeded, literally, on the first day I wore it. A woman I'd never seen before said that I was racially profiling her, that I kept pulling her over, that she'd complained about me, and she would do it again.
That's what I reported you last time.
You're receiving one citation today?
I'm not signing nothing.
Okay.
I'm not signing nothing. Second time, and I reported you before, and I'm going to report you again.
Okay. I'm Officer Shelby, Officer 890. You're well within your rights to come in.
The records, not just the video, all backed me up. And as you heard, I was reasonably polite. Body cameras aren't bad. They have the potential for abuse in selective or worse, pervasive recording. But we're not there yet. In part 2, we met defense attorney Stephen Wasserman.
I'm with the criminal practice at the Legal Aid Society and in the Special Litigation Unit.
Stephen thinks we need to be vigilant. We're not in a place yet where government surveillance is pervasive, but we are absolutely on the road to it. I don't get the heebie-jeebies about cameras like many on the defense or civil liberties side of the fence, but I am sure that many people haven't thought about what they were screaming that we had to get, or else, and that bothers me. Before we invest in any technology, we need to ask the right questions. What do we want to accomplish as a police department for our community, and what is the best way to accomplish it? What are our current capabilities? What do we want to accomplish, and what's the delta between those two things? And what's the best technology to fill that gap and best integrate with the technologies we already have? The technologies into which we've already invested taxpayer dollars. In many agencies, none of that happened with body cameras. Many agencies actually don't begin their process by considering carefully their needs. Instead, they ask friends at other police departments whether they can borrow their policy as a starting point, and then they hack it up. That's about as sensible as taking your friend's high blood pressure medication for your bad back. The idea that your friend's problems are the same as yours is ridiculous. In the worst cases, agencies crib copies of their body camera use policy from the vendors that sell the cameras, who provide them in the name of best practices. That is like asking the bartender how much you should drink tonight and whether you should get well drinks or top shelf booze. In the face of evidence showing that body cameras record but don't change behavior on either side of the lens, judges and politicians still say they can change behavior. Here's Stephen Wasserman talking about the early days of cameras in New York City.
The judge that ordered it in New York did so in the hope that it would make everybody behave better.
So once again, we're letting hope drive technology purchase and rollout, training, procedure, and policy. When we let politicians and activists tell us that all we need is some box to solve our problems, we abdicate responsibility for our technological destiny. We met Harlan Yu, who runs Upturn.
Upturn is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and we study technology's impact on civil rights and social justice issues.
Upturn believes that policies are responsible for how cameras are used, and the policies in place now have moved the goalposts.
In the communities that I work in, a lot of people see body-worn cameras as systems of surveillance, not as tools for accountability.
Again, I support body cameras, but I'm aware that their deployment raises significant privacy implications. By demanding video cameras on every officer, in a few years' time, we're going to have 800,000 people with body cameras. How those cameras get operated, when they're turned on, what the video is used for, none of this is clear. If we don't want a surveillance state, we really need to start paying attention to how these technologies are being used. And I mean, actually used in real life, not as used in a stump speech or analyzed on the Young Turks or by some guy on CNN. Whether you completely trust or completely distrust the cops, we're hanging cameras on 800,000 people. That puts us on the road to a place that many people might have some issues with. If we don't have some real conversations, some real specific conversations, we could find ourselves someplace we don't want to be. That means Americans have to stop communicating in sound bites, stop throwing talking points at one another, and start actually listening to one another.
I think whether we go there or whether we take a different direction is still up to us.
Special thanks to Seth Stoughton, Peter Moskos, Stephen Wasserman, Ben Singleton, Bill Flanagan, Roger Lee, Harlan Yu, and Rachel Levinson-Waldman. Also, thanks to Hannah for pushing us toward these short-form episodes. So what do you think? We're on the web at qualitypolicing.com. On Twitter, we're at qualitypolicing. Or you can call and leave us a message at 516-362-3972. We choose the best comments and questions to play and discuss on our show, but we will never reveal personal details left by cops, prosecutors, or defense attorneys to any third party, and we won't reveal your identity on the air.